Hi there, I'm Donna Boyd.
And I'm Srinivas.
And today we're going to talk to you about product ownership and what is it.
But before we get started, we just want to take a moment to celebrate how wonderful it is that we get to stand here in Burulu, and we want to pay our respects to the traditional custodians of the land, who are the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and express our gratitude to them for their continuing contributions to the land that we're on. We also want to take a moment to actually thank our sponsors, because without whom DDD wouldn't happen. And big shout out to Journey One as well for believing in us. Thank you very much.
Right, so let's get started. So as I mentioned, I'm Donna Boyd, and my history really started around about 15 years ago. I started working in digital and the technology space. I was always going to have a little bit of a blooper. So I started there about 15 years ago, and probably 2012 was when I first got exposed to the role of a product owner. And since then, I've been on the path of discovery of what that actually means.
Hey everyone, I am Srinivas, as we mentioned earlier as well. So contrary to Donna's decade of experience or so, I've only been figuring out what it means to be a product owner for the last 10 months, give or take. I'm really passionate about the intersection between business, technology, and social impact. But I've become more and more curious about the product owner role and how pivotal it can actually be in the success or otherwise of a project.
So we'd just like to call out that we're not superheroes in this space, but we are super curious.
Absolutely.
So true product ownership style, what we've done is really kind of collected some research to understand what are the common questions. So some of the questions and some of the challenges that people have are, do we know what it means? Is it something that we want to be? How do we get there? So that's where we started.
We also understood that these are some of the challenges that we want to be able to address, some of the problems we'd like to tackle in our conversation here about what the value of a product owner actually is and how sometimes it can be undervalued at organizations. And we want to be able to understand how we can achieve the outcomes that our customers love with a true product owner.
So really that links through to our vision, so every product owner should have one. Our vision is that this talk will help you understand what product owner is at its core and how to navigate some of the challenges in both being one and working with one. So if you are one of the nice people that voted for this talk, what we've just shared with you is the actual brief that we submitted for this talk. Before we move on. Has anybody here worked in Agile before? Tough crowd. Has anybody here seen a backlog before? Cool. Just two of us then. Has anyone here seen a user story? Yes, great. So if you have seen one, you might have seen one that looks a little bit like this. So in the interest of behaving like product owners, we actually turned this talk into a user story, which every backlog item should hopefully have. And we wanted to think about it from the perspective of our users, which are you. So as a DDD attendee, I want to understand more about product ownership and what it is so that I can understand why they are valuable and if I want to be one.
Let's go through some of the acceptance criteria that we've written with you as our users in mind. We hope that you'd be able to walk out of this with an understanding of Agile and where the product owner role came from. We hope that you'll be able to understand some common challenges with the role, whether that is being a product owner or working with one. We hope that we'll be able to understand some common anti-patterns and actually what an anti-pattern is. We hope that you're able to understand different stakeholder types that you might come across as a product owner and give you some tips on how you might deal with them.
It's probably the most fun part.
I think so. Looking forward to it. And finally, an idea on how to get started if, after all of this, you actually really want to be a product owner.
So with that in mind, I'm going to try to give you a 5-minute rundown in Agile. So if I do this in 5 minutes, we're on to a winner. So let's rewind back to 1986, which was obviously before my time. The new product development game was a report that was written and published in the Harvard Business Review. And it was written by Hirataka and Ikejiro. Did I say them right?
You did, yes.
And what they talked about was how the change was happening in technology of how people developed products. They went to different organizations who were doing really well and wanted to understand what were their patterns in those teams so that they could try and identify them and share them with the rest of the tech community. So what they noticed, and I won't go too deep into it, you can Google it and you can read it, it's pretty large. So the key thing that I'd like to talk about is normally it was done sequentially. So when you're rolling out a project or a product, you would do one stage, then you would move on to the next stage. So think you gather requirements, you would do the design, then you would do the test, then you would build, then potentially no one would use it. Just joking. But what they noticed was the new companies, instead of operating in that kind of relay race, they actually took on more of a rugby scrum type of format, which was where they had regular communication. They would pivot if things were changing or not going so well, and they would learn really early on what they need to change towards. So that's 1986. History of Agile. So I don't claim to know all of the different methodologies in Agile because there's about 50. What I will say when you see this is please be kind to your Agile coaches because there's a lot to know.
This is like over half a century worth of knowledge that people need to know.
Don't expect them to know every single methodology. But really we can talk about in 1970, the common way that people delivered products or projects was waterfall delivery, which some of you may be familiar with. Then we moved on into 1974 and we talked about the concept of adaptive software development. Now my memory's not the best, so I have to read the slide. Next one was 1991, rapid app development, and then one of the ones that I definitely do know about is Scrum. So let's talk a little bit about Scrum. I won't go too much into it, but it was actually inspired by the paper that we just talked about before. So where they mentioned the rugby scrum, that was actually what led Jeff Sutherland and
Ken Schwartz,
you wouldn't get the name, to come up with the Scrum framework. And one of the other interesting things about Scrum is from all the research that I've looked at, that's when the product owner role was born. So let's move on to the next one. So 1996, extreme programming. If you've ever heard of a spike, what I understand is it came from there. And the next part that hopefully some people are familiar with because everyone talks about it is the Agile Manifesto. So this was done in 2001. It actually turned 20 this year. Kudos. It's not a new thing. So let's talk a little bit about the Agile Manifesto. Has anybody seen the Agile Manifesto before? Cool. Does anybody know what it is? No? Okay, so you may have been exposed a lot in organizations about frameworks and you need to do all these things, you need to estimate, you need to write user stories, but actually that's not how Agile started out. It started out as a manifesto here where they talked about 4 values and 12 principles. And if you wanted to work in Agile and you just followed that would be enough to make you operate in a better way. Sure. Anything you want to share?
Absolutely. I just want to highlight that this isn't our beautiful slide design. This is actually a capture of the original Agile Manifesto webpage. And I love that they've just left it in its original vintage state.
Yeah, this was born in a 2-day conference in a ski resort in Utah. So it's been 20 years. Maybe it's time we had another one.
Yeah, for sure. I'm on board with that. Ooh. So we've talked quite a lot actually, thank you, on like the history of Agile and how it's developed over the years, the evolution of it. But let's talk a little bit more about what organizations are using currently. So we've mentioned Scrum. The State of Agile release a report every year, and the 14th report is a really good one because it highlights that Scrum as a methodology is the most commonly used project management framework used by organizations. And it's great because it highlights that Scrum, being the simplest one, is so widely used. It's very closely followed by Scrum Ben, which is a combination of 2 of the most simple ones as well. You've got a couple of hybrids that come in just behind them there. And then you do have Kanban, and that's where that Scrum Ben comes from. Scrum cross Kanban gets you Scrum Ben. Kanban's a really great methodology too because it doesn't actually confine you to 2-week sprints to deliver value. And it's also widely used across different organizations, across different industries, not just for software development.
I find it's been used a lot in marketing teams or even leadership teams to just try and keep people accountable and keep the work moving.
That's it. And then I love this. You've got a couple of others that come through, but there's a couple of organizations that actually don't know what they use. And it'll be interesting to be a fly on the wall in those kind of organization and project planning meetings. Who knows what we're doing? No one knows. But if Scrum is one of the simplest methodologies to use, and it's also the most common, what does a Scrum team actually look like? Of course, you start off with your Scrum Master. They are there to make the team hum. They are there to support, enable, and empower your team to actually do the work and build the product. You've got a product owner, which is the focus of our talk today. But in one line, they're there to make sure that the product that you're building is valuable, actually delivers business value.
I think it's important to call out as well, when the Scrum Guide was updated, I think it was last year, it actually made it responsible for the Scrum team to be delivering value. So the product owner is still leading it, but if you're in a Scrum team, you still have a responsibility to care about value.
Absolutely. And let's talk about the last players that are commonly found in Scrum teams. You've got your development team. We've got a couple of roles up on the screen here. You've got your developers, your BAs, UX, UI designers. But it doesn't have to be developers within a development team. It's basically any combination of role that you need to actually build your product, to actually do the work.
It could be content, it could be marketing. There's like a whole different suite of where people have gone and taken all the functions that they need to be able to deliver a product and put them in one team to stop that handover.
Absolutely.
It's also worth calling out the Scrum Guide doesn't recognize those other disciplines, but they do talk about the three roles. It talks about Scrum Master, Product Owner, and Development Team.
Let's zoom in on the product owner. The product owner, the Scrum product owner, is accountable for maximizing the value of a product resulting from the work of the Scrum team. What does that actually mean? How do you see that in practice? Let's digest it a little bit.
It's worth calling out, one of the names that you should look up is Roman Pichler. So Roman Pichler has done a product management framework, and I know we're talking about product ownership, but product owner actually belongs in the product management space. He really talks about the difference of a product owner in Scrum versus a product owner in the likes of SAFe or Scaled Agile. So in the larger organizations, the responsibilities of a product owner might be a lot more focused than if you're in a true Scrum team where you have to be thinking about the vision and the roadmap and maybe are a little bit more empowered.
Absolutely. Now, I know that we've talked a little bit about a core Scrum team, and we've talked about how a product owner is responsible for driving the value. But wanted to give you an example of how delivering business value actually requires a symbiotic relationship with multiple stakeholders that you might come across. I want to talk to you a little bit about some roles that aren't traditional Scrum roles, but you might actually find them and you might have encountered them in different organizations and different projects that you've worked on, particularly because there were so many hybrid models and hybrid approaches that people use too. First up, a product owner has to work quite closely with a project sponsor. They are more of an external facing role in the team, and they really own that vision with the product owner. The product owner themselves is responsible for that value. They're internal and external facing. They get the vision and they communicate that to the customers, bring that in, understanding exactly what their issues are, and use that to prioritize the backlog and deliver value through the development team. A product owner has to work very closely with the business analyst. Business analysts are more internal facing. They are more in charge of the details. They manage and they gather requirements and they refine them. And they're there to facilitate conversations. So they bring key players into the room to facilitate a decision, but the ultimate owner of decisions is a product owner.
You're actually pretty lucky if you have a BA and you're a product owner, so that some of the weight is taken off with shaping up that backlog and getting user insight and all of those things. If you work really well with your BA and have that really good, strong relationship, you can just keep driving that product forward.
Absolutely. It's a big role, so any help is welcome. And finally, the relationship between a product owner and a Scrum Master has been likened in some of our research to the relationship between a CEO and a COO. You've got your product owner out there screaming, shouting the vision from the rooftops, and then you've got your Scrum Master who's there responsible for retrospectives and responsible for your agile ceremonies and running refinements and making sure the team hum and making sure the team are enabled to do exactly what they need to.
They're really good when you need the team to be protected as well. So lean on your Scrum Master if you need a little bit of support and you're not getting where you need to.
Absolutely.
But sometimes the importance of a product owner definitely gets lost, which we have seen in multiple organizations. And I think I was very lucky at the start of my product owner journey to work in places who already understood the value. But in more recent years, I've been focused in companies who actually have forgotten that and have proxy product owners or just don't have the role at all.
Yeah, absolutely. More and more we're seeing organizations who undervalue the role of a product owner and of course a Scrum Master as well, and ask one individual to actually take on both of these responsibilities. We've talked about how a product owner is there to deliver business value and is there to be the voice of the customer and is there to understand what the customer and advocate for what it is that they want delivered. The Scrum Master, on the other hand, is there to advocate for the development team and protect them and make sure that whatever is being delivered sustainably in a way that the development team can actually keep up with the demand. Now, being able to make decisions when you have one person doing both of these two roles, advocating for different stakeholders, it's really difficult. That internal friction that you have with these two roles is so healthy and so important. You need that balance between what the customer wants and what can actually be delivered as well. And it's so important to actually have those in two separate roles.
I call them the two-headed monster, where you would have a Scrum Master and a Product Owner. So, and if you have them both doing, like you've got one person doing those roles, you're going to find one's going to lean towards the team more and the team's going to be spot on, but they won't be delivering much. Or you'll find that they'll be really leaning towards that product vision in the future and they have a massively outweighted backlog, but the team are having all sorts of challenges.
Absolutely.
The next one is also what I'm seeing. So if we, we'll get there. So agile teams with no product owner. Touched on that a little bit earlier on. So I couldn't quite find the image that I wanted, but if you imagine this boat was round, probably a little bit more like a life raft, and you had a whole team on it, no product owner, no leader, no direction, didn't know where they were going, just hoping someone's going to help them out and tell them what they need or come and pick them up and find them. That's kind of what it looks like with an agile team with no product owner. Now imagine that you have a rowing boat and you've got someone at the helm directing the direction, you have a map, you know where the end is, you know where you need to get to, everybody's rowing at the same time, everybody's on board, you know, you've got that rhythm. That's what it feels like when you have a strong product owner working really well with their development team. But even product owners can get it wrong. So Aish might tell us about that.
Sure. Let's understand what Antipattern is. An Antipattern is a commonly used process that, despite initially appearing to be an appropriate and effective response to a problem, in fact has more bad consequences than good ones. What does that actually mean? Let's take a look at this video and hopefully tell us something interesting.
And hopefully it'll work.
Yeah.
Hey, Jerry. Jerry, are you okay with this hinge?
Yeah.
Because I can get you any kind you want, 4 holes, 2 holes, bronze, no hinge at all.
Why don't we just go with the one in your hand?
These are different.
Drop one. Left.
Jerry, do you want a flat edge on this molding, or do you want me to bevel it?
I'll tell you what I'd like you to do with it.
Conrad, is it? Conrad, Connie, or Con, whatever you prefer.
Listen, let me ask you a question. Could you expand the space underneath the desk? Give it a little more headroom.
George, he's kind of tied up here.
Whatever Jerry wants. He wants me here late, I'm here late. He wants me here early, I'm here early. He wants me.
Why don't you just work on George's project for a while?
Whatever you want. Hi, Jerry. I'm sorry I'm late. George and we've been up all night long. I can make up the time to you any number of ways.
How about this? Finish this thing up today!
Couple questions for you.
No! No more questions! Just figure it out for yourself and get it done!
All right, Jerry. But I can figure it out myself any way you want.
Just do it!
Every time I watch that, I spot something else that I can relate to when it comes to product ownership. Like one of the things that in that video I spotted that I hadn't thought about before was if you're not focused and giving your team attention, someone else might come and pinch them to go and work on their product. That does happen. What else do you see, Aish?
I mean, how's he gonna cook? Where's he gonna put his head when he's cooked? When he's cooking, like that's. Do you want to see what actually went wrong and what
happened next?
What happened next?
Yeah, go for it.
You want it back the way it was.
Yeah, that's right.
I don't get you, Seinfeld. You want something one day, the next day you don't like it. I mean, come on, man, make a decision.
Yeah, so I think it calls out there's a real difference between allowing your team, to feel like to be autonomous and to get stuff done, or not giving them attention enough for them to understand really the direction of the product. and you could end up, and people do end up with things that they have to throw out and rebuild because they're unusable.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you just had the patience to test it, to be present, to actually do some of that user testing, imagine you could have had a wonderful kitchen, but no. Nice one, Jerry.
So here's our top 5.
Antipatterns, yeah. So let's talk about this one. Underuse of no and overusing yes. So this actually comes back to that normal cliche term that we've heard a lot about under-promising and over-delivering. As a product owner, it is so easy to fall into the trap of trying to satisfy your customers and wanting to say yes, 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 you'll do all of the things that they're asking for. But it's going to actually stand you in good stead later on to be able to use the power of no in a powerful way, actually, to highlight what your product actually is and what it isn't, and be able to be reliable and be depended on when you're actually committing to something. People know that you will deliver. Because trust me, your life is so much easier when you lower everyone's expectations around you.
If you don't want a product that has loads of features and people can't figure out their way around it, then you really need to get good at saying no. Next one I like, AWOL, absent without leave, unavailable. So as well as being a product owner, I have been a Scrum Master, and I have gone to a cafe to find the Scrum Master, not the Scrum Master, that's what I was, the product owner, when they were not unavailable for stand-ups, or when the team had questions and the product owner was nowhere to be seen. You know, in this scenario, the stakeholders were probably pretty happy because, you know, they were having coffee with the product owner the whole time, but the dev team didn't really understand what it was that they needed to do, and everything got stuck. Nothing was getting reviewed or moved on.
Shocking. Next one. It's all about me. So Donna, I realise that this report has your name on it, but the credit goes to me because I ordered you to do this.
But I actually did the work.
Well, I created the culture that made it all possible.
But I did the work!
This is kind of 2 antipatterns stuffed into one. This is us being sneaky here. On the one hand, it is so important to give credit where credit is due. You are responsible for the vision, but the development team are actually doing the work. And it is so important for them to get that face time with the customer and to build that relationship and build that trust, so your customer understands that whatever they're building, whatever is being built to a standard that they're satisfied with. The other little antipattern that's in there is, as a product owner, you are not a manager. You are not there to manage or give orders or direct people to do stuff. You are a leader. You lead the vision and you lead the product and you lead the team towards success that way. So stay out of the manager lane and stay in the product management and the leadership lane.
Perfect. All right, design by committee. Right, I'm going to have to go closer so I can read these. Too scary, too silly, too different, too dark. Not our brand voice. Switches are polarizing. Might alienate dog owners. Fine, we give up. So I did work in marketing a long time ago, and I used to have a brief that had a lot of red pen or just said, can you make something flash? Like, I don't really know what that means. Really, this whole designing by committee, as a product owner, you need to make decisions. And if you listen to too many people and too many different voices, you're probably going to find it really hard to make those decisions. So this is an example that freezes so many different teams, gets them stuck, and is probably one that kind of sets the team a little bit offside. Like, if you can't make a decision, then you probably shouldn't be a product owner.
Fair enough to me.
Switch back.
Sure. This is my favourite one, caring about the wrong metrics. So, Sally, your output really isn't good enough. Only 15 lines of code, we really need more.
Do you mean the 15 lines of code that cured cancer?
Yeah, you see, 15 lines of code just really isn't cutting it. We need so much more than that. Imagine I gave you 10 seconds to draw as many flowers as you possibly could. And then imagine I gave you 10 seconds to draw one flower. Which one do you think is going to look a little bit better? When you miss retrospectives and showcases and other agile ceremonies in favor of project status reports via email, it forces you as a product owner to focus more on vanity metrics like velocity, burn up, and burn down charts. And it helps you actually avoid the value that you're delivering, and you're not actually keeping that front of mind whatsoever.
Value is definitely one of the hardest things to measure, but it is the most important. Leave the burn down charts and all of those to the Scrum Master to help identify challenges that the team face. They're definitely not meant to be used to check the performance of the team. So if that is the bad, what does good look like? Ta-da! The end. Bye-bye. No, just kidding. So let me just talk on a few things that we've discussed that are really important. So I think one of the things that you can get lost in as a product owner is just writing user stories or developing a backlog. But you actually need to be able to look up and look forward. So you need to understand how your product fits in with the overall business. You need to have a vision that you can share and bring people on board with. And you need to be trying to think, what does the next 3 to 6 months to a year look like, rather than just focusing on a few sprints ahead. Decisiveness, don't need to really talk much about that again. You need to be able to make a decision. If you can't make a decision, if you're one of those people that spends half an hour choosing from a menu, you're probably not right for a product owner role. Tenacity, you're going to be exposed to so many challenges, and you need to be able to get through those for the better for it and not give up. So I find this is a really good trait in a product owner. Passionate, if you don't care, no one else will. So make sure that you are working on something you care about. If you don't care about it, you should probably look at another product. And you need to be able to kind of lead with that passion and help bring people on the journey with you. Because as Aish mentioned before, you're not a manager. You can't mandate or tell people to do it. You actually have to make them want to do it. And last up, that kind of links in with storytelling. So you need to be able to spin a yarn. Don't ever assume that people know the journey that you've been on. Try and bring them back to the data or the user information that you have, or the problems you're trying to solve, instead of just talking about what it is you've delivered. So next up, but what do they do? So kind of touched on it already. So they lead the product vision and direction. If they are lost in a backlog, they're not really kind of doing that product direction. They need to be a really good communicator. So you need to be able to take your insights and bring them back to the team and bring them on the journey. And you also need to be able to do that outside the team. Responsible for the backlog. So let me just refresh what that means. Teams, customers, stakeholders. So let's just clear it up. You are not responsible for every single story that's in the backlog, but you are eliciting those from others and building out the backlog. If you have to just do that, you are going to be very busy. So actually leverage the people you have around you to define what that backlog should look like. Aish, what do you think about this one?
Voice of the customer. So we talked about it a lot, especially with that internal and external communication. But where do you get that value and that vision actually from? You're getting that from the customer. As a product owner, you're advocating for them and advocating for what it is that you know that they need, and that's actually going to deliver value for them and impact them in a positive way.
What about this next one?
Ruthless prioritization. So this was actually a quote from our CTO, Jenny One.
Thank you, Christian.
Thanks, Christian. As a product owner, you need to be ruthless when it comes to prioritizing stuff in your backlog. You need to be very clear on what your product is and what it isn't. And you can't do everything, and you shouldn't do absolutely every single story in there. And you really need to be able to make that decision to say, no, this is not something that we're doing now, or we're not doing this ever. And finally, you need to be, as a product owner, this is probably the best part of it, I think, being able to accept user stories and making sure things are done. And hopefully towards the end of this, you'll actually get a chance to hopefully sign up on some of our acceptance criteria that we set for you earlier as well.
We'll pay you in coffees.
So how do you know you're doing it right? Donna, I love it sometimes when when you're building a really good product and people can actually see the value you're delivering and they want a piece of the pie. Your inbox is just full of requests for coffees and interactions to see what it is and how they can get involved in it. Your team is actually reminding you of the vision, and that's a great indicator that you yourself are very clear on your vision and you're communicating it really well and quite regularly. And if they're able to shout it back at you, that's a really great indicator of how well you're doing with your vision. The team you're working with are actually all talking about the customer as well, so they understand exactly what they're building, why they're building it, how the customer's going to use it, and how it's actually going to impact their job. They understand the value that they are delivering as well.
Some of the best conversations I've had with dev teams has been when they actually challenge me and remind me that doesn't actually align with what the customer problem is. So having that like really intentional, safe friction where you're able to reflect on the users and the team push back on you is a great spot.
Absolutely. Why would anyone fight you when you're asking for budget? Because they can clearly see the value that you're delivering. The return on investment that you've been able to demonstrate previously, it's just a winner. And finally, your customers and your stakeholders are actually saying no for you. It ties back in with knowing your vision and making it so clear internally and externally. Your customers are very clear on what your product is and what it is not. And they understand where something might go, whether it be on your backlog now, whether it be on your roadmap for the future, but they're actually saying no for you.
So let's talk about one of the hardest parts of being a product owner. Aish is smiling because how I get through product ownership is definitely a sense of humor. So one of the hardest parts is stakeholders. And it's a bit of a zoo out there when it comes to stakeholders. And we're going to talk about some of the members of that zoo. So Aish, let's kick us off. Has anyone heard of the Hippo? Yep, cool. Yep, highest paid person's opinion. So not picking on CEOs, but it could be a CEO, it could be a general manager, it could be, and they might not be totally wrong, but they really believe in their opinion. And they're going to come into your team and they're going to tell you, this is the most important thing that you need to do. What do you do in that case, Aish?
Right, so you need to be able to empower them to make the right decision. But the way you do that is giving them information and giving them data and giving them examples and evidence of what you're going to be doing. But the thing is, they are not going to be interested in the guts of the work. They're not going to be interested in your back-end code and all of that kind of stuff. You need to provide them with information to make the right decision at a level that's just for them.
Awesome. Next one, Rhino. Really high value new opportunity. They like shiny things. Could be quoted to say, I have an idea. Of course they have an idea. They always have an idea. They always have the latest feature, latest thing in the market. Oh, we should be doing this because someone else is doing it. Yep, we want that one too. And you never really get a chance to finish off what you're already doing because they're always throwing something that's new at you.
To deal with a Rhino, to tame the Rhino, I think the best thing you can do here is have a really clear prioritization framework and have a really clear roadmap. Demonstrate to the Rhino that you're not just randomly saying yes or no to any features or anything that's coming in, but it actually fits in somewhere and the story makes sense.
One of the things with the Rhino as well is don't give in to the beast, because when you do, they're going to come back with more ideas.
Of course.
So try really hard to not let the Rhino in. Next up, Seagull. Well, it's probably in a zoo, eating from the bins, but loose connection there. But the image kind of tells you all about the 1 minute manager known as a Seagull. It doesn't have a fancy acronym. So this person just swoops in when there is a problem. You've probably not seen them for months. They've probably been off sorting out someone else's problem. But they really like problems. They're kind of attracted to them. And they come in and they shout and they blame everyone and they make them feel about this big. So Aish, what do you do when you have a Seagull that likes to swoop in and everywhere and then swoop out?
Apart from crying.
Been there. Yeah.
As a product owner, I think all you can do in this situation is bring your Scrum Master into the room and tag team this, right? But you need to do your best to protect and shield your team from this person. 100%. I think it comes a little bit back to the design by committee where everyone's going to have an opinion on something, but it's up to you as a product owner to decide what you'll take on and what you won't.
Next up, Wolf. Working on the latest fire. So they also like problems, but they like them, in the multitude. And actually have probably lost sight of value. They just are always thinking, this is a problem, this needs fixed, we need to do this better, and focusing on that rather than how can we deliver more customer value. So how do we deal with a wolf? They have a short attention span, they're quite disruptive.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I get it, right? Like, I get it's scary to be building a product and see so much of technical debt racking up, see so many bugs that are coming through as well. I think the best thing to do with the wolf, really, is to sit them down and go through a bit of a structured approach. There's a couple of different ways that you can tackle technical debt bugs and issues. You can either dedicate one sprint to just bug stomping, get it all out of the way, get it done, and then move on. Or you can also do an approach where you're actually committing to taking a couple of stories and a couple of bugs into every single sprint and keep going with that approach until you're all satisfied with how the product's going.
So last but not least, Zebra. Zero evidence, but really arrogant. So they have a gut feeling. They have nothing really to back it up. They're so sure. It's kind of similar. We're not saying that they come in certain boxes. You might find they have multitudes of these kind of different traits. But this one really comes in and has absolutely no evidence to back it up and is really probably not, they don't need to be senior, they're just really sure on their opinion.
Data. Bring them on the journey with you. Show them the evidence, show them the data, show them your research, and show them how you've demonstrated that what you're doing works. Let them know that you're willing to maybe test their idea for a new feature out in a low-cost, low-risk way. But be very clear from the start that you're not willing to significantly invest in their idea without a proper proof of concept and some evidence backing it.
So with all of that, what animal would make a good product owner? Nobody? Cool. Nope, no ideas. Not an animal. No, they're a zookeeper. So I actually went into the depths of the internet to try and make a connection here and found a zookeeper job description, which definitely has two descriptions that suit a product owner. So one is you need to understand the behavior of your animals or your stakeholders. And the other one is that you need to tailor your approach depending on who they are. So you need to think about what you can do to really kind of get the best from your stakeholders and appease them and keep your team working forward.
So hopefully we haven't scared you off. Are you still thinking about being a product owner?
Let's talk a little bit about what success would look like. We've touched on all of this already, but repetition is going to help us all, right? So key things, I won't touch them too much. Vision, know where you're heading. Roadmap, it's good to have some real good outcomes that you want to achieve as you go forward. Don't get stuck in a Gantt chart, that's another story. Backlog, continuously, that's why the infinity symbol is there. I have had questions about backlog. It's not a once-off kind of activity, it's a continuous activity. In fact, really, when you learn anything new, you should be going back to the backlog and thinking, is this still the thing that we should be working on? But not a sprint backlog. That's for the Scrum Master to talk to you about. Success measures, make sure that you're not only talking about what you think the value is that you're going to drive, but try and find a way to measure it. So if you can actually measure it, it really helps you with budget requirements, helps you with your team, and it helps you understand where it is you should be taking the product next. A one-pager. So if you look at the Atlassian health check, so there is an Atlassian playbook, which is pretty helpful. They have a health check and it talks about a one-pager, which isn't something that is asked for necessarily in all of the different types of methodologies that we've talked about, but it's your poster and it helps people understand what it is you do in a language that they can understand. And the final part, 100% committed, utopia. If you could get a product owner that could just be with you full time, you would have way more success, as long as they're a good one, than you would if you had like part-time, or what I've seen where they're 0.1 of an FTE, which is definitely not enough to be really successful in the role.
Absolutely. Now, it seems like we've painted a bit of a picture of a fantasy here with unicorns, and you need to be able to do everything all at once, all the time. But I really want to highlight that this is about you as a product owner leading the vision, being value obsessed, and focusing more on growth, not perfection. If you're able to work towards your ideal vision with some of these things in mind, you'll be right.
Yeah, Roman Pitchler actually talks about it. If you use his product management framework, then you could just pick the things that you need to work on and just continuously evolve on that. You don't need to be perfect at everything. And just how you get started. So I'll give you a bit of my experience. I fell into product ownership. So when I first became a product owner, I wouldn't say I really knew what that meant. And the reason that I ended up there was because I was working in the digital space and I was working on websites, and I was wondering what was happening to all the customers as they went through the sales funnel. They just kind of disappear, and I had this target at the end, but actually I only could impact this part. So what I did was I actually got a role in some legacy systems that no one wanted to do because they were dying. But the thing is, users still use them. Those systems, I think, as well, are still around. So for me, that gave me an in. I chose a role that no one else wanted to do. So I would recommend that you have a look for opportunities like that. You need to, if you're a product owner, then you should be attracted to new opportunities. And also find yourself a mentor and figure out what your organization already has. Or, if you're working in an organization and you're doing really well, it's going to be easier to find a role in an organization that knows you than maybe starting out with another one. And there's so many people you can lean on and meetups that you can lean on as well.
Absolutely. Speaking of people that you can lean on, here is where we actually gathered a lot of our inspiration for this talk. We've got people like Jeff Payton, Melissa Perry, Marty Kagan, and Roman Pitchler as well, who we've mentioned multiple times throughout. We drew a lot of what we've created here today based on some of the incredible talks and incredible books and whatever else the research that these people have put together. And we've also got a couple of product owner communities that you can absolutely be a part of as well. And there's a lot of support out there for this, I think.
So given where we've got to, Aish, what are we going to talk about next?
Have we accepted our acceptance criteria?
So you're all product owners for today.
Yeah.
And we'd like you to just quickly go through this and see if we've met the acceptance criteria. I will caveat that if you say no, then you need to speak to us afterwards. So,
we've kind of ran out of time. So, do you feel like we've understood Agile at a high level and understand where the product owner role was born? Fantastic. Do we feel like we've understood common challenges with the role, whether that's being a product owner or actually working with one? Wicked. Do we feel like we've understood common anti-patterns? Amazing. Do you feel like you understand common stakeholder types that you might encounter and maybe how to deal with them and how to get started on that? And if you want to be a product owner, do you feel like you understand how you might get started in the role? Amazing.
Awesome.
Woohoo, we did it.
I just want to leave with one more question. What do they actually own? That's the one thing I know that we haven't talked about. The answer, and I might get a few looks here, is nothing. If you look at Melissa Perry, she wrote the book, The Build Trap, and she will tell you that the name actually causes a wealth of confusion and the product is actually owned by the team. At stretch, you can say they own the decision and they own driving the value.
So there is so much more that we can cover and so much more that we can talk about, including that last part there. We want to be able to unpack that. So we've actually put together a little bit of a backlog ourselves. So hopefully you'll get to keep an eye out for Product Ownership Part 2. But until then...
With your feedback, we'll figure out what that looks like.
Exactly. Thank you very much, folks.
Thank you. Good job, Aish.
Woohoo!